lakes everywhere else, just kept on coming back to Altona. Mum one day said, "What are you going to do? You can't live with me forever." I said, "I'm going to bury you in the backyard," and pull down the house. Well, that started Mum thinking, because she got a bit nervous, I think. So we built the little unit next door, and I was going to pull down the house, but I started looking at the house and what would be built nowadays, nothing against the more modern builders, and I thought, I just can't pull down the house, so we've just renovated. So I still live where I grew up. Lisa introduced me. I first got really interested, like a lot of people in Altona. We're all 10-pound poms and wogs in Altona, basically. And we all grew up in 10 or 12 square little houses. All growing up in Altona, it was really hard because Mum and Dad were well known, and Mum said she had eyes in the back of her head, and I really believed it, because anything we did as a kid, Mum and Dad knew before we even got home, whether it was Joan the Smiths telling them, or the Studleys, or someone else. So when I got to 17, 18, like most Altona kids, we just wanted to get out. So I got out of Altona saying I'd never come back here. And it wasn't until, as I said, we moved from Willie back to Altona, and then my girls, I've got two girls, beautiful girls, 14 and 17, until my youngest, like me, a little bit cheeky, not scared to say anything, started asking about her grandfather, who she never met. And that prompted me about 3 years ago to go down to the Historical Society. Went down there, and it was it was great, but I was a bit disappointed. There was nothing there that was really about Altona and its people, you know. So I got onto the committee, and now I've been president for the last 3 years. And a job over there is to build membership, but to get people's stories down. And there's a lot of people like the kids, the Smiths, Olga, Margaret Rice down the back there. They've got some amazing stories about growing up in Altona, and we have to document them and put them down. A little bit about my family history first off. Feel free at any stage to correct me, Joan, or jump in with another similar story. As I said, I'm not as good as my dad. I grew up with him sitting in the bath with his reel-to-reel tape recorder when he had to speak at Rotary, the council, or anything else, writing his speech and going over it and over it and over it. My father wasn't very educated. I think he went to Willie High until he was about 12 or 13, then started work, then went to Footscray Tech to become a builder. So when he had to do a speech at council, he went over it and over it and over it and over it. I spent an hour this week putting some photos together and writing down a couple of notes, and I tend to ad-lib, so if I'm half as good as the old man, I'll be all right. My family, as far as we can tell, came to Melbourne in the early 1800s. Actually dug up, and it was thanks to Jimmy Studley, another local, that gave me some newspaper, and I found a 1842 Melbourne Patriot, which was the precursor to the Argus and everything else. It's a 4-page paper. And Melbourne was only founded in 1835, so this was only 7 years later. And it's got a list of the people who were eligible to vote in Melbourne. And of course, you had to be male, you had to be over 25, you couldn't be of any other ulterior race, and you couldn't be a female. And there's my great-great-grandfather noted in that. So we know they were in Melbourne in 1842. Dad told me that a lot of them started building out in Brunswick, and they were builders there. I've got some photos here, and I'll bring them up as we go along. And if you've got any questions, let me know. We just got a quick little blank here while the computer's... Lisa, you may have to help me. Why is the computer not... It's gone to sleep and I can't wake it up. I'll leave it to Lisa. Yeah, I've got a couple of photos that I found. My father, in about 1986, closed his building business and went to England to chase up the family tree. He was very interested in the family tree. He got to England, was there about a year, found graves, everything else. Then got look at what they thought was a bad cold or pneumonia while he was in England. They said, look, you should go back home. I think they knew more. He came back and they found he had mesothelioma, which is asbestos cancer. Being a builder in Altona, everything was built of asbestos. And unfortunately, 18 months later, he passed away. I've got boxes and boxes of stuff from his at home that I've got to sort through on the family history. So I know a bit about it, and there's a couple of photos I'm going to show in the moment that I've found only over the last 10 years with the advent of the internet. But basically, my father came to Altona in the early 1900s. He was born at the back of the Williamstown racecourse. There was a little road there called Ascot Street. There was only about 3 or 4 dumpy houses down the end of the street. And my father and his 4 sisters were all born there, and my father was born there in 1929. He came to Altona properly, because that was like Williamstown, in 1949, when Vacuum Oil took over the land to build what's now Mobil Refinery. Just 2 seconds. Just get these photos up and show. Password protected.
It's all right.
There's stories around, and I've heard a couple of people say that my grandfather, who lived down the back of the racecourse, was the caretaker. I don't think he was. My father said my grandfather never really had a job. While my family for many generations was builders, my grandfather was just a labourer. And back in the Depression, very little jobs. He netted fish at the back of the rifle range there, grew potatoes, and after the race meets used to go around and collect the bottles and any ticket stubs just in case it was a winning ticket. So he got the name as a bit of a caretaker of the racecourse, but I don't think he was. All my life I heard stories about that because my father on Friday night, typical Altona kids, would have fish and chips. My dad didn't want fish and chips. Mum would cook him steak or something else because he said he had fish and potatoes every day of his life when he was growing up. So he really didn't want to participate in the fish and chips. This is one photo I've dug up recently. It's my great-great-grandfather's brother, and it was taken in the 1950s in Tasmania. And my kids are disgusted by this because that's a Tassie tiger he's holding up there. You know, there was 4 brothers, and they all looked like Ned Kelly back then, and their names were Harold, Edward, Joseph, or mixes of. So it was Joseph, Harold, Edward, Joseph, things like that. There's another photo there I'll just show as we go along. That's a picture of the Williamstown racecourse back in the 1920s, and my father's house was one of these over here. I'm not sure which one, and that of course now is covered with tanks and the Mobil Refinery. But that's the Williamstown racecourse back in those days. The Willie racecourse was started in about 1873, and it was one of the only 2 gazetted racecourses, that and Flemington. And it ran right up until about 1945-46. During the First World War and the Second World War, they used it as a staging ground for the troops. So the troops would leave from Gempier, but they'd all come, camp and bivouac on the racecourse. So the racecourse was closed, and they'd march across the ford or the bridge. There used to be a bridge there. There's the ford, there's a bridge, and there was another bridge over the back here, and they'd go down off to Williamstown. Big stories about the racecourse. Why it burnt down when it did. They were prepping it after the Second World War to start again as a racecourse, and John Wren, everyone knows John Wren, famous politician and everything back then, he actually got himself onto the board. It was a bit strange because he had land at Caulfield and he was trying to start the Caulfield racecourse up, but the Victorian government said there can only be 2 gazetted racecourses in Victoria. So it might have been a bit of a conflict of interest, but as soon as he came onto the board, a year later it burnt down. Yeah. So there's a little bit of a story whether he had anything to do with that. You know?
Peter, can I just ask a question? Do you want questions?
You certainly do. Take the pressure off me.
Just help orient me where I am on that picture. Where's Flemington Racecourse from there?
Flemington Racecourse, mile that way.
It's a long way away, isn't
it? Yeah. So there's Croix Creek. We're nearly standing. It would have been taken, look, from a plane or a balloon, and we're basically standing out over the bay. There's the pines down here.
Oh, I gotcha.
And there's the grandstand.
Now I know.
Yeah.
So just before we move, there was a pine tree.
That pine tree's down.
It's gone now, but it was there.
No, it's still there.
No, the pine tree's still there.
Yeah. That's down in this area here.
The palm tree.
The palm tree. There it is there. I'd say. It's hard to tell in that photo. But it's down this bottom end. So we're looking, that road there would be Miller's Road.
Yeah,
and that's Croix Creek Road down there.
Yeah. There's rubble there. I mean, there's some sort of concrete patch. I'm going for it.
That's all the base of the old grandstand. As a kid growing up, my dad, we collected antique bottles. He bought, Mum and Dad were married, John, 1950, 51, somewhere around there. And Mum and Dad went up to Mount Macedon to the old Governor's Cottage for their honeymoon. A couple of years later, the Governor's Cottage burnt down, and Dad bought 2 acres of the actual land. So Dad, being a typical builder, it started off as one shack and ended up this huge house. But we were digging a foundation for a shed and came across some old bottles, a drunk bottle, the torpedo bottles, and an old ginger beer. And that started Dad and I on our bottle digging. Dad always said that one of the best bottle dumps in Melbourne is in the middle of the racecourse somewhere. And one of the best old bottles, everyone will remember the old marble bottle with the marble at the top, the soda water bottles. Yeah. There's a Williamstown and it's got the time ball tower on it. There's only about 2 of those in existence that are whole. My father remembers as a kid knocking the top off them to get the marble out. So whenever winter hit, Dad would drag me down. I'd probably drag him down half the time with a big piece of steel, and we'd go around the pines when it was mushy, dropping the bit of steel down and twisting it, trying to find the bottle dump. But it's one of the only dumps in Melbourne that they've never found. So there'd be an amazing archaeological dig there somewhere on an old bottle dump, you know. Yeah.
There'd be nothing metal in there that you could detect with a metal detector.
Yeah, there's too much metal there though, because of all the old gates and everything else. Williamstown racecourse was a bit different too, because it used to flood. We all remember it was a flood. A lot of the fences had fold-up hinges on the bottom, so all the grass and everything else, if it did flood, then it didn't break the fences down. The fences would just open up, let it flood through, and then drop down again. The remnants of all those fences and everything else are just scattered all across that area. We went down metal detecting, and you did beep, 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 beep the whole time. If you get a piece of metal, though, a good piece of steel, we use Rio with a bit welded at the top, you can actually tell when you hit a bottle, when you hit glass, and when you turn it, you can actually tell whether that glass bottle is whole or a piece. It sets up a resonance that you can, after a while, you get to know. Yeah. So I was going to... These photos are not working. There we go, we'll get this going, guys. There's just a few photos here, just as we go along. I'm just going to bear with me. So I'll just keep on talking while I'm doing this. So in 1949, my grandfather's property was taken over and Dad moved into Altona proper. He started his building business with another Altona local, Joan's husband, Bill Smith, in 1949. It was called Weaver and Smith. And the first house my dad built for him, his new wife, my mother Lorna, was on the corner of Seaholme Avenue and Civic Parade. Mum tells me stories, and I can't remember half of Dad's now, that Mum spent a lot of time making the curtains, making the bedspread and everything else. And not long after they moved in, a sheep jumped through the front window and bled out all across her bedspread. Because it was all paddocks, there was nothing there.
Wow.
Then not long later, you know, a year or so later, someone came in and offered, and there's contention on the price, and Mum thinks about £900. Some guy came along to Dad and offered him £900 for the house, and he said, Lorna, we're moving. So then they moved into 16 Blythe Street, and Dad bought the block of land for £800 where we live now, and he started building the current house, and it was the first architecturally designed home in Altona. He started building it about 1952 and didn't finish it until 1956. The reason why it took so long was bricks. You couldn't buy any bricks in Melbourne. There was no brick factories, everything had slowed down after the war, and the only bricks you could end up getting were what they called finger bricks. Normal bricks are about 2.5, 3.5 inches. These are like that. He was really disappointed because it wasn't the bricks he wanted, but then after he built it, he was wrapped because it looked different to everything else. So that was the first architecturally designed home in Altona. While we're talking about that, he built a few other houses. He built, and I used to talk to Bill because my dad died in 1986 and Bill died last year, and used to ring Bill up, or I used to ask Mum, did Dad build that house? And she couldn't remember because she was in the office. So then I used to ring Bill. He built a few, Betty Eddington's house on the corner of Bain Street and Queen Street. That's another house that Dad built, same South Yarra architect. The Dunstan's Dairy House, which is next to Ted Hubble's, right down the end. Everyone will remember that.
Yeah,
that was another one he built. I was wrapped when I was in real estate. I've been in real estate 10 years, Sweeney's 5 years ago. I sold that to Jared Sanfilippo, which is now, he's the Burbank boys. And most of the people would have pulled that house down. He's got endless pockets, old Jared. He spent about $400,000 on the house, bringing it back to its former glory. As far as I know, too, he built Fraser's, Tyrrell's, not Tyrrell, the other chemist.
Yeah, Fraser.
No, Tyrrell and Herbert. Ian Herbert's house, I think it was, on the end of Queen Street too.
Yeah, down the good end.
Yeah, that I was wrapped. We sold a couple of years ago, and it's on a double block, and the people are going to keep the house as well.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I get a bit emotional when I sell houses in Altona. I've got to sell to the highest bidder, but I love it when I sell to someone that's going to keep the house. That's a picture of my dad, my lamb, and my dog Tina. In the backyard of the house I still live in, you know. It's amazing now, the garden, and like Dad always said, the garden's about that brick level. He said the worst thing for this area was all the poms and wogs kept on gardening, and they build the gardens up, and he said it's not good for the house. You know, well, that's a picture of Dad. That would have been taken. I was only 3, about 1968, somewhere around there. My little dog Tina got bitten by a tiger snake about 6 months after that photo, running around here in the backyard. You know, people worry about snakes; they were more prevalent back then. Yeah, we used to go to Cherry Lake and catch the tiger snakes. I'm having a problem with this again. Doesn't like my USB. I'll get to that in a second. I might go this way. My dad. I was lucky. Dad built a lot of the houses in the area. As I said, Lisa said he was mayor in 1973. Joined the council in 1968 till 1974, and he built a lot of the local landmarks. He built St Ainsworth Church, the senior sits, the youth club, the hockey club, and that's a picture. I don't know. I'm sorry who the other gentleman is.
Bill Lee.
Oh, Bill Lee. Thank you. I need you guys across at the south side at the opening of the hockey club.
He was mayor as well.
Yeah. There's Dad with Croftsy, and you're probably going to tell me who the other two people are as well. I don't know. Yeah.
Charlie Bates is obviously in
Yeah.
Williamstown.
And there's the old council chambers back in those days, and I'll open that one up because there's Doug Grant and a few others in there. There's Doug there, and my father, and I can't remember the other names. I know the faces. Trying to get to it. There's St Ainsworth Church Dad built. I was lucky the old church that was on the site, the spire at the top, the little top part, that ended up, Dad cut that off in one piece with a chainsaw, put it on the back of the trailer and took it out of holiday house at Mount Macedon, and that was my cubby house for a lot of years until it rotted away. And I don't know whether that's the opening of the hospital or I think it's the actual AGM of the hospital committee back in the 1960s. Yeah, and there's my mum with a big 1970s hairdo and my father sitting down there. Because Dad built the extension to the hospital, this end where basically the Lewis Joel Centre is. Service Church. And there's probably the daggest one of all. That's 1973. Beautiful colours and hairdos and dresses. And that's myself as about an 8-year-old, my sister Jenny, my brother Paul, and my mum and dad. Dad got out of council in about 1974. It got a little bit political. He was building the townhouses on the corner of Grieve and Blythe Street, the double-storey ones. No superannuation then, because that was going to be his super. And they're still there and still solid as the day as they're built. They were solid concrete floors, first and second story, and double brick walls. I remember I was working down there with Dad, and I remember the Maracca brothers with the little Maltese brickies that are still around today. They built one of the walls 2-storey, and it was out by about 1.5 inches. Dad made them pull it down and start again. But that got a bit political. There was a few people in Altona who didn't want that project to go ahead because it was the first of the developments, and it got a bit political at the council, and Dad ended up leaving council in 74. Yeah.
So it was double-storey, wasn't it?
Yeah, double-storey on the corner, and there's 8 units. Look, I'd scream about it now again. You know, they tend to be doing it too much in Altona. They're not building what Altona wants. We want little single-storey stuff for people to retire into, and they're building 2-storey pillboxes. You know. I'll run to that. I'll go to the next one. I'll bring up some photos of these in a second. I was talking to, most of this story is actually from Bill Smith. I was talking to Bill a couple of years ago before he passed away about Altona and its start and my dad's building business. As I said, he started the building business in 1949 with Bill. And Bill and Dad ran the business for about 6 or 7 years. The money wasn't coming in enough, so Bill actually went to leave, left the business, but then stayed on as foreman for another few years. Because most of the old pobs and wogs, excuse my saying that, but I was brought up with saying that, were brought up with... they didn't have any money. They came here on the ships on either £5, most of the POMs, £5 or £10 tickets, and most of the Europeans came across on a service agreement that they'd worked for 2 years. And they didn't have the money for someone to build their house, and they're all pretty clever guys, so they build their house themselves. They just got Dad and Bill to come in and do the roof frame, the trusses, because they weren't clever enough to do that. Bill said it took 5 or 6 years for people to earn enough money to get someone to build their own house, and for Dad and Bill to get the reputation of decent builders before they were employed to build the whole house. Most Altona houses, good and solid, nice Tassie oak floorboards, and that's because the builders would lay the floorboards very carefully, give them a light sand, because most of the people moving into it couldn't afford carpet, so they live on the floorboards for the first 5-10 years until they afford carpet. Now all the people who sell houses to, they're wrapped because they get in there, rip up this old daggy carpet, these beautiful floorboards, half the time polished underneath. So it goes in waves. There's a couple of old pictures. That's a picture of the RAF base down at Point Cook. And that'll be back in about the 1910-15. You can actually see some biplanes down at the front. A lot of people don't know the aviation history of Altona. A French guy called Signet flew a Blériot here just north of Altona train station in 1910. They didn't give him a lot of kudos, I think, because we were good colonialists. We gave a lot more kudos to J.J. Hammond that flew the next year. Signet did have a bit of an accident landing the plane. They say he hit a cow. Whereas Hammond flew a lot longer. He flew over Melbourne, then flew to Geelong and back. And one of the first paid flights with him was of that year in J.J. Hammond's plane. And the Prime Minister of Australia at the time and the Army came down to see these new flying machines, and that's where all Point Cook started from. That same year, I'm trying to think of his name, the famous Houdini flew at Deer Park, and a lot of people don't know that. Yeah. There's a picture of J.J. Hammond in his plane, another shot of the plane. And of course, back in 1910, there was nothing around down here, so it was nice and flat terrain. There's another picture of the planes.
Do you know if he flew the plane here?
Yeah, he took off from Altona, flew around, landed again, then he flew down to Geelong, which was
how did the plane get here? Did they build it?
I'm not sure. Margaret, Margaret's another expert on this. Do you know how the plane got here? No. Yeah.
I would imagine it came on a boat.
Yeah, it came on a boat, I'd say.
You'd be flying it.
Yeah. Probably came on a boat, Jem Pier, and then down in a horse and dray down here. Any other questions about Altona?
There's a plate, isn't there?
Oh, Lisa, you might have to come back. I've lost my little...
Beside the gate.
Which?
Lisa, can you come back and just find my USB for a second? I was going to tell you about another bit of history instead of talking about my family. A lot of people don't know Altona, the populations of Altona were very, very low right through until the 1950s. Back in 1910, 1920, there was only about 100 to 200 people in Altona, and it wasn't until the 1950s and the immigration from Europe that Altona, in 1950, the population was about 2,000, and by 68 it was about 30,000. And there's one amazing story about the Pattons. I don't know if many people know the Patton family. Still a lot of relatives around. Did everyone know the story? Do you want me to go over the story? Yeah. I got this actually from Owen Kersley's wife, along with Valerie James and a lot of locals. They're all relatives of the Pattons. The Pattons was a boating tragedy that happened in 1931. And I'll just read it out to you. This is the stories the family knows in 2010. And this is another thing, our job at the Historical Society. We've got a couple of pictures. And what we plan to do is put this story up with the pictures of the family. The events have not been recorded by the family until now, as great efforts were made to consolidate and move forward rather than backwards at the time, and subsequent generations have had the story passed down. However, it now seems time to document this piece of Patton's and Altona's history. Whilst we have family members with first-hand knowledge of the tragedy and its aftermath still with us, Walter and Alice Patton lived in Queen Street, Altona, and had 8 children: William, Bill, Walter, Mick, Albert, George, Stanley, Leslie, Herbert, Florence, or was known as Floss, Dorothy, and Ruby. For some reason that was common in those times, the birth name was not necessarily commonly used. For this reason, the known by name is in brackets. Port Phillip Bay, September 1931. Walter left Altona Bay on a fishing expedition with his 2 sons, Walter and Herbert, and his son-in-law, James Walker, on what seemed weather-wise perfect day. This was a regular occurrence as the Pattons fished not only to feed their large extended family, but if the catch was large enough, the surplus was sold to the public via Walter's butcher shop, which he operated from his Queen Street home. Mick was married and had 3 children, Rocky, Aline and Len. Jim was also married with Herbert, Jimmy, Alice and Jean. Herbert, the youngest, was only about 16 years old. Herbert was late on that fateful day and he was not keen on going along. He reluctantly agreed after being persuaded by his mother, as she knew that there may have been problems with his father if he didn't help with the workload. The party had already set off when Herbert was sighted running along the beach to catch up, so that would have been along the Altona foreshore towards the pier. The boat returned to Altona Pier to collect him and set off again. It came to light later from a passerby that the boat was seen to stop a couple of times as it headed out and needed to be restarted. What happened next, nobody knows for sure, other than to say that neither the men nor the boat were ever seen again. They simply went fishing and never came back. Alice, Mick and Jim's wives and children, along with the rest of the Patton family, no doubt, walked the foreshore for days and weeks, at first hoping that the men had been sheltering somewhere or beached along the bay with engine problems and would eventually return and turn up with a good story to tell. Alice's youngest child, Ruby, said many years later she accompanied her mother on a daily vigil for many months, waiting and hoping for something to turn up, which may shed some light on the mystery. The only evidence ever discovered was a small piece of timber, the lid from the engine box, which was washed up on the eastern side of the bay about 6 months later. It was assumed that the bay became rough and treacherous as Port Phillip Bay is known to do. The men were well aware of the reputation and the moods of this piece of water, as they were experienced fishermen. They knew that squalls could quickly develop, and for this reason they regularly stuck to well-known and well-marked routes. In most cases, visibility of the shoreline was maintained to enable quick docking if needed. These were commonly known and used safety precautions. But for all their knowledge and experience, the Patton men never returned home. It seemed that the rough and choppy waters, combined with a possible faulty engine, may have spelt their doom. The consequences and ramifications for that close-knit family were huge, as they struggled to keep homes with children together without husbands, fathers and breadwinners. There was no welfare or support in those days, so future was bleak. Who knows what would happen if not for Alice Patton? Although dealing with her own substantial losses, she rallied the family and provided them with emotional, physical and practical and financial support, such that she had. Alice looked after the children while their mothers found jobs and went to work. Her strength and resilience provided a shining example. Throughout her life, Nana Patton, I'll just click that again so I can see. Nana Patton, as she was known, has been loved, revered, admired and respected by her children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Her courage and strength provided a beacon of hope, whilst her loving, happy personality remained intact despite life's injustices. Her family hoped that future generations do not forget and can be proud to have such a woman as her own. This was all given to me by Owen Kersley's wife. A testament to her enduring and positive personality, Alice Patton was a founding member of the Altona Life-Saving Club and the first female life member of the Altona Football Club. She was a woman actively involved and passionate about her family and her community. She embraced and accepted all life had to offer, the good and the bad. A sad postscript to this story is that 6 months after the boating tragedy, Alice's son, Leslie, who had been visiting his mother daily and providing great comfort, died tragically at the age of 29. He had been duck shooting at Cheetham Salt Works, which is over the back of Altona Meadows, in Point Cook, when he was found dead in about 6 inches of water. It was found that he had suffered a heart attack. In a half year since, she had lost her husband, 3 sons and a son-in-law. Les left behind his wife Dorothy, who was in her early 20s, and 5 young children, Mickey, Dorothy, Raymond, Brenda and Norma. The children's ages ranged from 7 down to twin girls aged 6 months old. It was at this time the Altona community rallied to the aid of Alice and her family. Led by the generosity of the Fleming family, fundraising efforts were held and the proceeds went to completing the building of Les and Dorothy's house, which at the time of Les's death was only partially built. Naturally, tragic events touch whole communities. Altona was about the time essentially a small village. As I said, the population would have been less than 500 at that stage. So the kind support and assistance from friends and neighbours must have brought a great comfort. Survive this new sadness the family did, with Alice again leading the way, but not without great personal cost. The strong and resourceful matriarch nearly buckled at this latest blow. Why couldn't I have been left Les, she asked, as she rightly and thoughtfully she'd lost enough. Alice went on to survive all her sons. Her granddaughter Alice, Ali, tells the story of funeral cortege for her remaining son, Bill, passing her house in Queen Street. Nana, an old and frail lady at this stage, not physically able to attend the funeral, came out to the veranda to pay respects to this, her last son, as a hearse passed by. Alice Patton passed away in her mid-90s. Her funeral service was the largest ever held in Altona at the time. Her life was long and obviously eventful, but she was and is remembered not for the tragedy which shaped her, but for the way she lived her life. She refused to let herself or her family be victims, nor be bent or bowed. She forged forward with courage, strength and humour to create a happy and loving environment which all her family prospered and grew. To say that she was a great woman would be an understatement. So that's, I don't know if many people knew that story, and it's a story, back in those days there wouldn't have been many families around. The Flemings was another family mentioned there. The Flemings, I was talking to Chris Fleming not long ago, and I always heard different stories about Flemmo's Pool. He actually told me the story why it was Flemmo's Pool. I always was brought up that it was Mrs. Fleming that he used to take down to bathe at the pool. Yes. Chris said, no, it's not because of that. And Chris lives over near the golf course. He rang me about 3 months ago and said, I've got some old films that you might be interested down at the Historical Society. I nearly had a heart attack. Yes. I thought, amazing. Unfortunately, they were just films of the Flemings' trip to Europe and trip here and trip there. We've still got to go through a few of them because there might be some snippets. But I wasn't, still thanks to Chris, and that's what we need. But I thought it might have been a bit of a gold mine. But Chris said, mainly because all the Fleming boys, they worked apparently at the rail yards. And back in the 1930s and 40s, very little water in Altona. It was all tank water back then. As they came home, they used to get off at Seaholme Station and they'd be pitch black, filthy dirty. So they'd walk down to Flemmo's Pool on the way home, have a shower, wash off and everything, and then go home to Bly Street. So that's why Chris told me that was called Flemmo's Pool, because where'd you go? Oh, just down Flemmo's Pool with the Flemmos swim. So I'd always been taught it was Mrs. Fleming's, she had polio or something, used to be taken down to the end of the beach to have a swim. So that's another variation. And there's probably lots of variations on the little Altona stories, There's a plaque down there, noting it. Yeah. Because the Flemmos were the first people too to start the primary school. Back in the 1930s. They had to, the government said, yes, you can start a primary school, but you've got to have 14 kids. And there was only 13. So Mr. Fleming put his youngest in there as well to get the numbers up to 14. Then at the back of their house in Bly Street, they built a room, and that was the first primary school in Altona. I'll run through some old photos I've got, guys, because as I said, the photos probably speak a million words. And I just hope these... That was a land advertisement for land in Altona back in the early 1920s, and it was called Kent Farmlets. And the big push was that you could buy a block of land in Altona and have guinea fowl, chickens, a cow, everything else. And that's 1.5 miles from Altona Beach, 1.5 miles from Laverton Station. That was the big push. A lot of people don't know. Anyone know why we got in 1888, why they built the pier? The pier was first built by bloody real estate agents. To try to push people to come, the promise of raspberry vinegar and cucumber sandwiches and a free trip to Altona if you buy a block of dirt. They still do the same thing, but up in Queensland, you get a free flight to Queensland. Yep.
Where was that situated?
That, I've been told, is in Upton Street. Where there's the little shops opposite, And Sinnett's became Peter's Ice Creams later on.
Does anyone remember the milk bar and grocer down on the corner of Maidstone Street and the Esplanade?
Yes.
On the corner of Maidstone and the Esplanade?
Maidstone Street.
Atkinson's.
Yeah.
He went teaching in the end,
It's amazing, everyone knows, like in Upton Street, then in the Nordini estate, which they now call Seaholme, it's not really Seaholme. Round the corner from my place in High Street, there was a butcher, a grocer, everything else. We've lost all of that. You know, I call it the Coles mentality. We all go to Coles, buy tomatoes, come home, complain they don't taste. Hope no one works for Coles. Don't taste, but we go and buy the same things again. Yes.
Does anyone remember an old milk bar
Just here.
right there,
Yeah.
across from the historical building?
Yeah. We actually had a story from a gentleman, and I can't remember his name. He came to the homestead one Sunday a few months ago, and he was born in the homestead. And the story was his wife went into the city to the Royal Melbourne, was told no, it's not time yet, came home on the train, was walking back from Altona station, got inside the homestead, fell to the ground in labour, and the guys at the milk bar across the road here heard the screams for him in the homestead, so came across, and that was in about 1940, came across and helped her to give birth. So we've got his family noting that story down for us. There's a great picture I've just come up with over the last time today. It was given to us by Tom Campbell. Tom Campbell's done a great history on the British migrants estate, and he's got some amazing information from ASIO with the Freedom of Information. Because back then ASIO had a big focus on Altona, and particularly the British migrants estate, because all those Poms and Scots, the Unionists, and they're all communist, or thought to be communist. And I've seen some of the paperwork, and they're ASIO files, and some of the names are blotted out, but they've forgotten and left a few of the names. And they're old Altona names, and it was all about communism. That's behind the Seaham Primary School.
All right.
This is Miller's Road here,
Yes, yes,
down there.
yes.
So there's the pier, and that's Seaham Primary School that was started in 48. This was taken in about 1950.
Gee.
That house there at 44 Sussex Street was the first house built in the British migrants estate. It was handed over to the McGarry family in 3rd of October in 1953, and Harold Holt handed across the keys to them. You'll see in that little estate, the British migrants bought this estate. It was like a co-op. You'll see none of the corner blocks are built on. Because when it came to, it was all a ballot system. When it came to, there was too many arguments. Everyone wanted the corner blocks, so they thought, all right, stop the arguments, we'll sell the corner blocks. Then it was agreed the McGarrys had 5 kids, and it was all on how many kids you had, whose house got built first. So the more kids you had, the faster you got your house built. But it all fell apart in the end in the late 1950s, early 60s, because there was 4 or 5 families left to have their houses built, and everyone thought, no, I'm right, Jack, I got my house. And it all fell apart at the end, unfortunately. But you can see, these are the little huts they were built first, that they lived in, until their houses were built. That was, there we go, that was the house I talked about. I'm going to get the priorities right. The house I talked about before, that was the first house my dad built for him and my mum, Lorna, on the corner of Queen and Seaham Ave. Because when they built, Dad built that in 49, there was nothing. It was all paddocks with sheep.
Don't see that. No.
That's that front page, Arthur Ricord and Co. specialists. They're all Collins Street land developers. I'll give you a quick rundown of the history of the homestead. Alfred Langhorne came in 1938 from England and landed in Botany Bay. He came down to Melbourne and got a land grant on 2,713 acres of land with 2.5 miles of beachfront. That was basically all the land from Skeleton Creek down to Croix Creek. And he ran sheep and cattle. He built the homestead about that time, but it was only if you've been inside that first little room as you go inside. And it was just a little timber hut. There were fires a few years later, and his wife Sarah from England was a bit perturbed by the fires, so he thought, I better build something a bit more substantial. He couldn't get any bricks or anything in Melbourne because Melbourne wasn't founded until 1835. There was nothing around. So all the bluestone you see in the building, and most of it is still original, was brought in the hulk of ships from Tasmania as ballast, and he built the current homestead. In 1874, he actually passed away. The land was sold to J.J. Phelps, which were Collins Street land developers, and that was the first of about 6 Collins Street land developers that took over the whole Altona area right up until the 1920s. It really didn't boom. They put the railway line in 1883, first to the coal mine, but then to try to sell the land. The pier in 88, and they tried all these different things to sell land, but it just didn't work. And it really didn't work until after the Second World War, when the first of the migrants came in. There was a few Maltese family, like Tony Briffa's family, were First World War migrants. You know. And you guys probably remember, the building was used through the 20s and 30s. It was a family home. In the late 30s, ICI bought it, and they put tram cars and rail cars out in the paddock in front, and it was used as a getaway. If you work for ICI in the city, this is where you came for your holidays. And the tram cars you slept in, and the homestead was where you cooked, ate, boiled your water, things like that. In the 1950s, it was used as a council chambers, historical society, scout hall. The front right room down the front was a dentist, and that's in the 50s where you went in to pay your rates as well. And it wasn't until people like Ted Hubble in 1988 convinced the government, the bicentennial, they gave a grant of about $250,000, and they regenerated the homestead to what it is today. Because over the 40s and 50s, it had been bastardised so much, the fireplaces, all the period pieces have been taken out. That's at the end of Pier Street. That's what is now Weaver Reserve, named after my dad, and that would have been Pier Street up here. And that's people playing around on the beach and the foreshore. I'll just run through a few photos. If anyone's got any questions, let me know. That's Pier Street in the late 1880s. That facade of that shop, everyone knows, if I say the paint shop on the corner of Railway South and my father built that in, probably with Bill, I guess. Did Bill build that as well? There's a plaque on that about the aviation. But that is next door to that.
We've seen
that. Is there.
Right? Yes.
This picture was another real estate blurb. That picture, that is just the facade. There's a little shanty behind it. And I've got some, I haven't got it here, but I've got some real estate advertisements saying the first of the architecture in Altona. And it was basically just a stone facade. If you went up and pushed it and leaned against it, it probably would have fallen down. But that's Pier Street, and you can see the pines right down the end where Coles was.
There was no railway then.
Yeah, in 1883 the railway was put through. First to the coal mine. That's the Esplanade. You can see the pier there in the background. See, they still have the seaweed pier problem back then, guys. It hasn't changed.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I read.
Nice bathing costume there. We should have got... Margaret's got a great bathing costume that she's given the Historical Society. You should have got Margaret to model that today. That's swimming off the end of the pier. That's in the 1960s. The pier fell into huge... it degraded and fell apart. They were actually... It was early because it was Shire of Werribee, so that's pre-1960. Probably 48 to 58, somewhere in that time. They're actually thinking about demolishing the pier. And a lot of people don't know, the pier was about a quarter the length again, further out.
Used to be working crane on the end of it.
Yeah?
And
Yeah.
There was a break in between the pier
Yeah.
and the working section, which was just the main of pylons and such,
Yeah.
with a crane on it. And we all used to go out there and dog the top of it.
Yeah. Probably a lot of people here remember too, the Mago Pier, no remnants of that left. It was about 6 or 7 years ago they took the last of the couple of pylons out. They've put one pylon back, but it's more a marker, but it shows you where it was. I remember as a kid, Dad saying some of the best whiting grounds and gummy shark grounds, and you'd go off the end of the Mago, there was a pipe and a bit of wire, you'd have to shuffle along, But it's a pity things like that have all gone. That's the end of Pier Street, that's the Rotunda. And the Rotary Club have built,
Oh, so it is.
the Rotary Club built the one in the park as a replica of the one there.
Gee.
And there's the end of the pier, and just to the left here would have been the ABC Cafe.
Oh.
You can see it now.
Another one of the pier, all the men in their hats.
Look at that.
Another one.
Dress for swimming.
That's a bit more modern one. Carracks there. By the age of the cars, I'd say it would be mid 1960s.
That was the paint shop on the corner, wasn't it? And that was the...
Yeah, Kim, who later his son was Kenny Kim, the sports shop. We all went in there to get our tyres fixed, to the punctures and everything else when we were kids. And you can see still the pine trees. Those pine trees are probably where Coles are now, and then the further pines down the end.
And those little shops are still there.
It might be a milk bar.
Yeah, and that's where the alleyway is.
That's right.
There's still that facade, that same facade as before.
Well, that's Harvey's shoe shop and Mayfair Milk Bar.
Yeah.
Noonan's.
So Noonan's, yeah.
Noonan's. I used to go to Seaham Primary School and I used to come and walk home for lunch. And I remember on Thursdays, Noonan's used to, the Taggets, I think, were at the milk bar. They used to deliver the Noonan's pasties. So I'd come home for lunch on Thursdays because I knew I could get a steaming hot, fresh Noonan's pasty.
Wonderful.
Yeah?
Margaret worked in
A sixpence, a pie and 2 cakes.
Margaret worked in Harvey's shoe shop.
Yeah. There's another one of the beachfront. That's a famous one. Kima Press put on that on the calendar, and we put it on our calendar last year. We had a little desktop calendar. That's the Baker's Van in Upton Street.
Wow.
You know, and everyone knows this. Altona used to flood all the time. You know, we had huge problems. Dad was on MMW from this 1965 to about 72, and he, along with a lot of the old Altona locals, pushed for our sewer to come on, because the big story was we were below the poo pipe that went from Spotswood to Werribee. So they thought, oh, shit doesn't flow uphill, excuse my French. Altona, don't worry about it, there's only a few people down there. So we weren't on the sewer, so everyone had septic tanks. I remember a story, everyone knows Owen Kersley, the Kersley family and the Thompsons. Our families have been intertwined for years. My mum was born 3 doors down from where I live at the moment, down at number 40 Queen Street. She tells me stories of walking down to Altona Primary School and walking past, I'm at 42 Queen Street, and Bill Smith would be sitting on the front fence because Bill, and that's Joan's husband, lived at the bungalow at the back. Where was I going then?
Well, that's why there's no hotel in Altona.
Why?
Because they wouldn't build it because there was
There's no sewer. Yeah. But Mum tells me stories that she lived at that 3 doors down from where I live now, and that brings another story. When I was building Mum's unit, which is right behind, I designed the unit, and I actually had it designed facing across the park a little more to the beach. And she said, "You don't need to do that. I know where the beach is. Just build me a bay window so I can look where it is." Because she was born 3 doors down. She tells me stories when she was a kid that she used to, if it was a big southerly storm, because there was no esplanade down this part of Altona past Romawi Street and no esplanade around the Seahome end. The blocks went all the way through. And Mum said if it was a big stormy winter's day, you had to wear gumboots to go to the toilet because the storm surge would be coming over the dunes down to the outhouse at the back. You know. But the story I was going to get to is Nita Kersley, which is Owen Kersley's mum, used to babysit my mother in the mid-1930s in that house in Queen Street. And then Owen Kersley stayed with our family when Nita and her husband went overseas in the 1960s. And Owen was about a 16-year-old boy and apprentice mechanic to someone in the area, and used to smoke in the toilet and blow the smoke out the window but drop his butts down the toilet. Well, he killed the bug in our toilet and our sewer overflowed in the backyard. And I always remember that.
So what year was it when the sewage came through?
Between 1969, they started talking about it in 1968, but it was 69 to 73 that it was all put through.
So how much later was that compared to Inner Melbourne? Or
Inner Melbourne, like Williamstown, was put on in the early 1900s. All the sewer in Williamstown is all red brick. I've been down. I used to live in Hobsons Street in the back lane. I was cleaning up the back lane because I asked the council to do it, and they said, no, it's not a gazetted lane. It didn't have a name, so it's the responsibility of the owners. I got a bobcat in there, scraped off dirt and everything else, and I found this big trapdoor, and I opened it up with a crowbar, and it was actually down into the sewer, and it's all red brick, and you could stand up in there. Yeah. But yeah, the sewer wasn't put at Altona until 1973. And a lot of houses right up until the late 70s. I still remember my first day at school, going to meet the Smiths and the Studleys outside our place in the corner of Millers and Queen to walk off to school. I still remember the toilet man going around the corner and one of his tins falling off. And we all screamed and ran back home and had to walk the long way to school. And I try to tell my kids like that, you know, that we didn't have mobile phones, colour television. That's some of the floods that happened. There's a lot of flood shots here. The floods in Altona. You know.
And I remember when I'm a recent newcomer, at least from 1986, and it was a dry area. Yeah, there were no drinking or
No,
hotels.
no
or
hotels.
anything
No.
like that.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, as a 16 or 17-year-old. I'm glad my kid's not here. We'd ride our pushies down to Williamstown to do a pub crawl, and because there was about 30, I think in its heyday, there was 40, 45 pubs in Williamstown. But when I was growing up, there was probably about 20 left, and we always knew the word would go around which pub would serve us young kids. So we'd ride our pushies down, go to the one pub, then the next pub, and come home. But the police used to like it in the 70s because when they wanted to catch anyone in Altona, they'd put 3 breathalyzers out and catch everyone. More floods, all. And there's an early pier shot looking down the pier.
Oh, God.
There's a picture of the AB. That's a fantastic shot. ABC Cafe on the left, and the rotunda in the pier.
See that?
That'd be in the early 1920s.
It's still there, you see.
There's Senate's ice cream. I'll go back. There's another couple of. Another story I heard from actually Joan Smith sitting there. My father was very involved in the hockey club. There's a lot of Altona people. We were a good old hockey club back in those days, still are. A lot of people didn't know the hockey club started in about 1931. It was the Baptist Church Hockey Club. And it started in 1931 over at the Pines. And I've been trying to get pictures of this, but apparently when visitors from the other hockey places around Melbourne, Camberwell, Reservoir, Powerhouse, they'd get on at Newport Station to catch the little red rattler to Altona. The guard and the driver would see the hockey sticks and say, "Oh, you're going to the hockey club?" And they'd say, "Yeah." And the train would stop opposite the Pines. And the guys would get off. And he'd say, "What time your game finish?" And they'd yell out. And so he'd stop the train on the way back for the hockey kids to get back on the train again. You wouldn't see that happening.
What service?
Yeah. A little bit.
There was a station down there, wasn't there?
No, there was a station at Mobile, which was just over Creek
The
Road.
racecourse.
Oh, racecourse, yes. Yeah. There was actually 3 platforms at the racecourse. There's still remnants of it there.
Yeah.
There's still the concrete bollards. Yeah. Then there was another station after that at Mobile. That's a picture of the coal mine that's over near Harrington Square. They first discovered coal here in about 1893. Gentleman Tagtoe, that's why Tagtoe's street out in Altona Meadows. They really didn't start mining it until about 1903, and they closed it in 1916. They mined about 26,000 tonnes of brown coal. They still say there's about 200,000 tonnes of brown coal under Altona. But it was deep shaft mining, not like your lawn where it was open cut, and the mines filled up with water all the time. But that's why the trains were first brought in 1883, because of the coal mine.
But I heard that coal seam runs from your lawn to Anglesey.
Yep, and up to Bacchus Marsh,
And
it
that's
V's
why
out.
there's a powerhouse
Yeah,
at
Supposed to be
Anglesey.
all
Yeah.
out in the bay too.
yeah. And that's why the early covenants, as I said, they first started flogging off the land, trying to flog it off in 1883, but they didn't have much success. Most of the titles in Altona were written in the 1920s. And if you look at your old title, if the parchment one's still around, it says, "No quarrying or noxious trade." When they were selling the land in the 20s and 30s, they were worried, the depression as it was and everything else, that people would be digging on their land to try to get coal to flog off. Oh, everyone remember that? That's the cracker coming into Altona in the I think it was the late 1970s.
Oh, no, I don't remember.
No.
No, it was after that. That was the like.
Was it 90s?
Yeah, Williamstown, yeah.
Yeah. Everyone complains about Mobile, and look, I probably got a lot more to complain about too because my family were kicked off their land. But Altona, what it is because of Mobile and all those factories up there. It gave all our 10-pound poms and wogs a job and kept everyone going. Yeah, it was really nasty in the 1970s. They've cleaned up their act a lot. They still need more cleaning up.
Still paid their rates though, didn't they?
Yeah, well, Altona was renowned as one of the best little councils in the whole of Victoria because it was rich.
They got roads down there. Was the
Yeah.
Victoria road.
Yeah, yeah. And it wasn't until, look, the amalgamation in the 1980s kind of stuffed us up because all the money went to Williamstown. Because Williamstown, look, let's face it, it was built on 1870s road plan, roads, cobbled roads and everything else. And the land down there's reactive clay where we're sand, soil, silt. So a lot of the money went to Williamstown.
Yeah, a lot of their factories down Williamstown didn't pay rates.
Didn't they pay rates?
Well, the government,
Yeah. There's a picture of the coal mine down the shaft. One of the old first ones in the 1890s.
Yes.
Hopper heads. You see the mullock heap and the old workings. Just a few more shots.
No.
There's a coal mine in 1908, and that's situated just behind Harrington Square.
Oh.
Someone emptying a mullock truck. I'll just go back. There's another. Everyone knows about the Williamstown racecourse, the Aviation, and things like that. A lot of people don't know, and we're just getting more and more history about the racetrack around Cherry Lake. I didn't know until the last year or so. From 1952 to 1955, there was a whole heap of races around the track. They're actually thinking of holding the 1956 Grand Prix at Cherry Lake. They spent £35,000 in 1952 to bitumenise the track. There's still remnants of it still there. And that's first car Stan Brabham and Jack Jones. Stan Brabham and Jones in the second car. They raced there from 52 to 54. As I said, they spent £35,000 building the road. They got some old double-decker buses and cut the tops off, and they were the grandstands that they put in there. And they were thinking of holding the Grand Prix round there because it was closest track to Melbourne with train access, and they were trying to get permission to race around Albert Park, which they couldn't get permission, and they were in the throes of building Phillip Island. So it wasn't until about 1954, Jim Tester, as a local, many people know, his uncle died at the track, got stuck, his car, open wheelers, got stuck between another car, two cars, flipped upside down and landed in the lake, so he got trapped and drowned. Then there was another gentleman that died. Then it flooded 6 months later, and they thought, we can't do this. So Altona would have been a different place if we had the Grand Prix racetrack. And I've just got some really interesting shots. There's a picture of the track as it was. And that's new £35,000 speed track to open. Record crowds expected on Altona on Sunday.
Could you go back to the first one?
Yeah.
See where that flag is?
Yeah.
That's wrong.
That's wrong? There we go to start correcting things. Where was it?
It was on the Civic Parade end.
On the over this side.
Yep.
Yeah.
I raced there that day, so I should really well know it.
Yeah? Oh, you've got the article. Jim Tester gave me a copy of this article.
There's a copy of the results.
There we go. Look at that. And you're in there.
Yep.
Yeah? What was your name?
I'm my biggest name on it.
Short-lived and sweet.
That's the biggest name on it. Sidecar race.
Yeah? Okay, Stan Jones. Ultra lightweight, junior, senior clubman's. Seaholme sidecar handicap. B. Mac.
Bernie Mac.
Bernie Mac, that's yourself?
Yep.
That is amazing. Can I give you... I haven't seen this article. Jim Tester gave me an article that's the article in a car magazine about his death. Can I catch up with you later and get a copy of that? Yeah? I might even give it to Lisa to run off a copy. Yeah, thanks, Bernie.
1954.
That's it, so everyone can see. And that's a picture out of the Bernie race sidecar. Driver or in the sidecar?
I raced in the sidecar.
In the sidecar.
I was passenger.
Yes. Isn't it amazing? All these little hidden gems around the place.
On the little motorbike, you don't need 125 miles an hour.
Yeah? Yeah, I'll just flick. We're nearly... I'll just flick through. There's articles from the Argus about the new track. There's another picture of the races, and you can see the crowds in the background.
Oh, isn't it?
That's Stan Jones in his Grand Prix track for Altona. And that was an article about the new track. We're nearly out of time, guys, so I'm going to flick through a few of these. Flames Bernie's back. That's might have even been Bernie then.
No, that was a stunt rider.
And there's another couple of photos I just want to show you quickly.
A couple of the riders had a stunt.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That's Peg Smith, isn't it, Joan?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's Peg Smith releasing the the trout and redfin fingerlings into Cherry Lake. And that would have been about 1972, 73. Because everyone knows Cherry Lake was an absolute swamp, and in the early 70s the council, they put where the toilet block is, there's a bore there, and that's continuously pumping water to keep that lake full. And they put trout in there. I remember as a kid standing at the overflow catching carp and eels to give to the local. I used to sell them to the local Italians.
Would you eat it now?
I'd eat it now. Married a Japanese lady, she'd eat anything. That's Harold Holt handing the keys across to the McGarrys, that first house I talked about, in 1944. I'm going to be really quick.
Oh, there's the old school.
There's Altona Primary School.
The Altona Primary.
There's Joan Smith sitting down the front. I've got a picture of Olga here, I think.
Yes. What year was that picture taken?
Oh, is it?
Nice film one.
Yes.
The Cherry family.
Early 1920s. There's the Cherry family outside, and that was just north of the, I don't know if people know, Millers Road. Up the north end of Millers Road, it was Millers Road because that's where the Millers lived. Millers Road between Quart Creek Road and Civic Parade, or Nellie Street, was Cherry Road. And Millers Road from Civic Parade down to the beach was Victoria Street.
Yeah.
It was all changed. And in pre-war, Second World War, Rayner Street was called Fanny Street. Until the Americans came, and I think they were a bit embarrassed, so they changed it. There's Seahome Primary School, 1937. You in that one, Olga, or the next one?
Not in that one.
There's Altona Primary School in 1937. That's the Patton family. Pattons, the family I talked about before. That's taken in their house in Blythe Street, and you can see the little shack, and then they had a miner's tent. That's 1921. That's in the Progress Hall, which I think was the RSL Hall, the Diggers Hall. It's another famous one. That's up on the wall there. It is. That's Harold Phillips, a little boy, and Beryl Phillips. The Phillips still live in the same house on the corner of Waratah, or their kids do, and Civic Parade. Harold was my dad's best mate, and that was taken in the 1930s. That's taken standing where the cameraman would be Civic Parade, looking down Waratah Street. And as far as I know, down in the background there, that's Seahome Station.
And without offending anyone, I think the children are better looking nowadays.
Yeah. I talked to some people. That's another good one. That's the Sabiris family, and that's taken in the 1940s. They were professional fishermen, and that's their snapper catch. I made a joke with all my Maltese mates that the Maltese then still didn't take any notice of the snapper limits.
They'd have to have a decent sized mincer on the board.
Yeah. I'll go back and show you one last little set of photos. Racetrack, not schools. These are a bit out of order. That's the coal mine, the first train that came in. Steam coal train down to Harrington Square. There's Altona in the 1940s. Another one there, Altona Primary School. Another one, Altona Primary School. Oh, I've been through those. Everyone wonders why they all used to have sour paste looks on their face because the camera shutters weren't fast, so they had to go like that. Is that the one you're in, Olga?
Well, if it's the best looking one, it is. No, I don't think so. No. I think there's Bill back in that one, I think.
I think-
Go back, Peter.
Yeah.
Go back a bit. Yeah. No,
See
I
home?
think there might have been Bill at the corner. No, it couldn't have been.
Yeah.
He'd be too young.
1937. No, that would have been right. He would have been about. Bill was built the same age as Dad, 1929, 28, 29, 30.
It does. Yeah, it is, isn't it?
That's Bill Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other end.
Up there.
I reckon. Which one?
Yeah.
That one.
Looks like a
If you
Smith.
do something, some of these photos,
Yeah.
even they're in the photo I've got of me. They must have gone there, you know.
I had a picture of you, Olga, and you gave it to me. That's Altona Primary. I'll just go one little last batch of photos, otherwise Lisa's going to beat me up, guys.
What were the Cherry family known for? They were just
farmers.
Farmers.
Yeah. There were the Ross family, the Cherries, the Alfred Langhorne.
Oh yes, Langhorne.
And the lake was named after them.
Cherry family. Yes.
Yeah.
Cherry Langhorne.
Last couple of photos, guys. That's the Willie racecourse in the 1930s. A lot of people don't know Farlett ran and won there in 1931.
Well,
Yeah, that's the Williamstown racecourse. That's looking from above Cherry Lake on Millers Road, looking down across the racecourse, and there's Williamstown in the background. And you can see the little flooded lakes and stuff in the middle, and the little train bridge that was there. Another one of the racecourse. Sorry the quality of the picture, it's tiny. That's a picture of the racecourse burning down in 1944.
So how come they never rebuilt it after?
It was something to do with Ren and everything else. There was the only 2 gazetted courses.
Was he later rebuilt?
I don't know.
Was Nellie Street named after his wife?
I don't know. Margaret, do you know why Nellie Street was called Nellie Street? I don't know if people know. Civic Parade, prior to us becoming a city, was called Nellie Street. Do you know the history of Nellie? Yeah?
I heard
Yeah.
it was John Wren's wife. Yeah.
All right, there we go. So these are all the things we've got to note down.
So we've got a Wren Street.
Yeah, Wren Street. And all the houses in Altona Meadows, they're all named after. My dad had a bit to do with it because he loved the shipwrecks and the shipwreck coast, and that's why Almadoppel, Rebecca, North, South, Trafalgar. Then off Balaclava, they're named after the councillors. Then further south, there's Sherman, local priest.
what about Talbot? Do you know what that is?
Talbot was he was a priest. Yeah.
Well, I live in the Avery, and I think that Wren Street started.
That would have been, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's right.
Just early hockey club photos.
What year?
That's right. I do.
That's Cyril Turner, isn't it? That one there?
John Ford's up the top right, but I think that's John Fleming next to him,
Next to him.
and Roy Turner right down the left-hand corner there.
Yeah. And that's Cyril, is it?
Oh, I'm not sure about no, the bottom one's Roy.
That's what she says. Yeah. Oh,
It's the same shot.
oh, right.
There's a life-saving, handsing, strapping lads and ladies, weren't they?
Lovely, isn't it?
And there's an early cricket club photo. We got a lot of these photos and we don't know the names, so our aim at the homestead over the next year, we're getting more and more financial. I don't know if people know. We have ghost tours there once a month now, and people come through and get scared. I don't care as long as we make money out of it. I'll make up anything to make a buck. But it's made us about $3,000 in the last year. And the aim now is to have some touch screens up with photos like this, so people that can come in can actually tag and start giving us names. There's a few, I'll blow this up, there's a few regular known faces in that. There's Sammy Simons, yeah. There's Doug Grant, you know. All the names are at the bottom there. Featherby, Tricky, McNabb, Grant, Frankie Ranger in there as well.
Helen Stafford.
I'll just pull out a bit. You can. Oh no, I've just gone back. And they're all the names at the bottom. You know, Belgrave, Ray, Ware, Jeffries, Ranger, Woodyard. All those Altona names. Half of those names are hockey club people, so they used to play cricket in summer and hockey in winter.
Been to be coached the footy club for 4 years.
Yeah.
Charlie Tricky.
Charlie just.
That's what it was known as. Yeah. And there were some big old homes.
And that's Altona Footy Club. Looked like a rough couple of guys in there. 1921. The footy club was first formed in 1918. And it's an early Altona baseball club. And that's the 1919 footy club. They all look like butchers, don't they? Rough as guts. And I'm pretty sure that was taken at the Diggers Hall, where the RSL is at the moment. There's the flags, and would have been the picture of the Queen in the background and everything else. But see, photos like that, we've got hundreds of them. We don't know who they are. Oh, would have been the King then too.
The King.
Yeah. Everyone's crazy on cycling now. That's the Altona Cycling Club in 1930. And the football club in 46.
Did you get these off the website?
These are all photos we've got across at the homestead that I've been collecting, trying to sort out. And we're trying...
I put a lot of these on the footy club website, the past players.
Yeah, no, I haven't.
Haven't you?
No, my aim in the next couple of years is to go to the footy club, go to the hockey club, ask them to put displays on across at the homestead, give them a bit of space, on the understanding that when they leave we can have copies of everything, so we can get... I think that's it, guys. I know it's a bit ad-lib and a bit quick, but yeah. Any questions or anything?
No, sorry, the streets next to Cherry Lake, named after the Prime Minister.
All the Prime Ministers, yeah.
Did anybody know when that was started doing?
Yeah, Louis Nordini bought that land. That was that and the Nordini estate in the early 1960s. Very smart. Louis was one of the first bulk builders. He sold all of the land on the proviso you build with him within 2 years. Otherwise he buys the land back at the same rate. Yeah, Louis Nordini. Gary Simmons, the house on the corner of Chifley, Gary Simmons lives in that. That was Louis Nordini's first house. I remember as a kid going to Seaholme Primary School with Martin and Louis Nordini, and if it got over 35 degrees, we'd skip school, jump the fence, go to their place for a swim, and then go back to school. Yeah. But a lot of people don't know. Simmons and Burbank, two of the biggest builders in Victoria now, both Altona boys, born and bred, and they still live in Altona. Pam gets her hair cut every day opposite my house. It's at Sandra's. Yeah. Well, nearly every day. A little black Merc. Gary bought her a nice house worth 3 or 4 mil in Toorak. She said, I don't like it there. She's an Altona girl. Any other questions down the back?
I believe there was a quarry up where Altona North Shopping Centre.
Yeah. There was two. There was one, what they call Newport Lakes. Yeah, and then one up at Altona Gate. I know the Newport Lakes was coal. Does anyone know, was the Altona North one as coal as well? It might have been basalt.
It was aerated rock, very light.
Oh, right.
The Altona Lakes one was rock quarry.
Rock quarry as well.
Yeah, that's a paving spot.
Any connection with the man who used to put himself in chains.
Both of those quarries would have been like, I am assuming, 1930s to 19s.
That's a different word. Yes, I know you did.
Gentleman there was saying Mobil used to dump their sludge down there, but it was 1950s to 1960s.
Is it true that the road in front of the Pines was built by the convict?
Convict Road, yeah. Only piece of remaining road in Victoria left. Every now and then we get the council to... Yeah, every now and then we get the council to go down there, and it sounds rough, to put the street sweeper over the top of it, just to clean it off a bit. It's amazing they haven't been. As a kid, I grew up, as I said, my father was a builder. We collected antique bottles. When I was 18, I got my car and a trailer. I used to collect bluestone. And those units my dad built, there was a big land of common ground. From when I was 18 to 21, I collected 8,500 blocks of bluestone from Williamstown.
Where from the
Willie.
From the Ford?
No, I didn't flog them. From down Willie, but they'd be pulling a house down, and I'd go down, and all the foundations were bluestone. And the guys would say, kid, if you can get the bluestone out, you can have it. But I got steps from a bank, I got hearths, I had everything. And it was always the dream of my father died.
Ford was bluestone.
Was bluestone. I think it's been concrete over the top.
319, it was gone in 3 days.
I've got loads in my house along the Esplanade, that bluestone.
Yeah.
Somerville's family.
Yeah. But then they were throwing it away. My dad died when I was 21. We're always going to build a bluestone house. And when Dad died, I said to Mum, I'll stay for a year, but then I'm going overseas. I flogged the bluestone off, got 2,000 a block, and that financed my trip overseas. Yeah. No problem, guys. Thanks for coming along. little information sheets on the history of Altona, a little quick timeline and the homestead at the front, if you want to grab one.
Just before we break to have some afternoon tea, I wanted to get a show of hands, everyone who's here. If you could put your hand up and just let us know if you're actually born in Altona. Anyone here born in Altona? Children. Peter?
Okay.
Okay.
My children.
And if you've
I was
been...
born in the women's, but I've lived here.
Yeah, but
and if you've lived in Altona all of your life, just put your hand up. Yeah. And anyone that's been here for longer than 30 years?
Most of the hands will go up.
30 years is only 40.
So, but that's great. Now, did anybody have anything in particular that they wanted to say today, a story to tell? We can have a few minutes, maybe until 5 or 10 minutes, if anyone had something they'd really like to share with us. About Altona? No, that's fine.
I reckon Joan should tell how they used to. Joan should tell the story how she had so many kids they had to fling the toilet man a couple extra bob to come around and pick up the can twice.
And one of my daughters used to, she'd be on the toilet, was outside, just a pan, and she would talk down the hole to the toilet man.
Instead of getting embarrassed.
Did your dad build a house that the tennis player lived in Mervyn Rose?
On the end of Blythe Street on Millers Road there? I don't know. Merv Rose's house on that. Did Dad build that? Dad built that. I don't know. That's the worst thing of all of this. My dad died in 1986 when I didn't give a rat's. Now I want to know, and I used to cost Bill, but now Bill's gone as well.
We've got a lady here that
Yeah.
wants to say something. Would you like to say something?
I was most grateful when they built the footpath, because it was terrible trying to take a pram through sand.
Yeah.
Yes, that was in Ginnivan's year, I think.
Yeah. Because I remember stories of my father saying Blythe Street was still sand dunes and that through to the 1950s. It wasn't roads.
Does anyone else?
Until we broke away from where?
Yeah.
Anyone else have a memory of Altona that they like to share? Yeah. You probably don't need the microphone, but I'll give it to you. Okay. That's all right.
I moved down in Altona in 1953 when my father just completed a house on the Eastern Road, down virtually at the end of Rose Street. And he had to, when he put the foundations down, preparing for the foundations, he had to wait for the draw of the tide to draw the water out before he can pour the concrete.
Yeah.
And this is before the beach wall only used to come down a certain way. I think roughly it used to be around about Webb Street. It never came down as far as Rose Street then. Yes, that was, and beside our place where the park is now, that was all swamp and there. And I used to round up the cows for the local dairy.
Yeah.
With Gary Dempsey.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Kenny was down the back that just snuck in, could tell us a few stories.
The water table under the refinery is 20 feet.
Most of Altona, when the drought hit a couple of years ago, we'll forget about it now. We'll forget out the water tanks and everything for the next 10 years. My father in the 1960s put a bore down in our backyard. We're 100 metres from the beach.
Yes.
He put it down by just a high pressure hose and a bit of gold pipe and kept on dropping it down. I tried to put one in about a year ago and had a company come out, but at 1.2 metres, because in Seahome we're over the reef, at 1.2 metres to 1.6 metres in every spot I hit rock and couldn't get through. But a lot of the old houses along Webb Street, Rayner Street and everything else have got bores, and it's only 15 to 20 foot down, really good water.
Yes.
Not quite drinkable.
Yes. You've got it.
But it's brackish.
We're just before Amari Street.
Yeah.
My husband did it 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Easily, not far down at all.
And I looked into it. For me to do it was going to be $2,500. That was for the permit to Southwest Water. You have to pay for a permit. That was for the bore and the sleeve and the pump. But huge amounts of fresh water under there.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll just talk a little bit about the Family History Group and our local history group here at the Hobsons Bay Libraries. We've got a new library opening in Williamstown on the 20th of September, and in that library there is going to be a dedicated heritage room. So it's going to be a haven for people that are interested in local history, family history. It's going to be very well equipped, and there's going to be a couple of events there. The first one is the History Alive event on the 27th of September, and that's from 2 to 3:30, and that's going to be an introduction to the room. So you'll have someone taking you through there, showing you what's in there, what you can access, what resources you can access. And the other family history group events are Williamstown Buildings on the 25th of October at the Williamstown Library, and the local history research group will be at the new library as well. So if you're interested, it's worth coming along, even just have a look at the new library. It's going to be fantastic. And then we have the Williamstown History Series we've got on this site. So that's what's going to talk about where the library stands, what was there, what was around it. And the other one, which will be a lovely one for anyone that is local to Williamstown as well, is the Growing Up in Williamstown event. So keep your eyes out for these, they're happening very soon. Also, what we've been doing, we've got a lot of old videos that we've discovered, and these ones are Operation Recreation Parades. So they're fantastic. We're putting them up on the website. We've got a Facebook channel on the website. So, and that's just the front page of our website. You can access there. The best way, if you are on the web, is to like our Facebook page, because we'll have all of the updates of all the events and things going up there. Old photos like what you've seen today, and the videos, they will be able to be watched on the website. And we've got some great books that you can borrow on Altona and Longview. You may have already seen that book, but that's available to be borrowed. Pubs of Williamstown. So we have a really good local history collection to access here. And that's about all. I'd like to thank Peter for coming along and spending time today. And thank you all for coming. It's been great. And just another aside there, if any of you are from overseas, that you've migrated to Australia, we've got a Journeys project happening where you can tell your story about where you've come from and your life since you've moved to Australia. There's some flyers up here to take, Journeys to Australia, if you're interested. Maybe you or a family member or a friend might be interested. We're trying to document people's stories. That's what we find is a really powerful way to share stories. So that's something that's happening at the moment as well. But that's about all. Now it's time for afternoon tea. So thank you very much.
I'd like to reiterate what Lisa just said. Everyone in this room has got a story, and everyone thinks art's nothing. But if everyone had note down their stories or anything else, it's an amazing thing. I see a lot of faces out there, and there's a hell of a lot of stories.
No.